Guys, welcome to the latest episode of The Greatest Movie Years, the series where we travel back in time to focus on a specific year in cinema and discuss why it's notable and which great films were released. Here, of course, we're looking at 1941, a massive year for movies and for the world in general. Now, this was the year that a 26-year-old Orson Welles directed what's still considered one of the greatest films ever made. Humphrey Bogart and John Huston teamed up for one of cinema's greatest detective cases, and Disney's financial woes were cured with the release of Dumbo. Now, elsewhere, of course, the Second World War was in its second year, 1941, of course, being the year the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbour. Now, most of the world was embroiled in military skirmishes at this point, but as the United States wouldn't officially enter until the beginning of December 1941, the Hollywood machine was rolling on and churning out films that would eventually become known as absolute classics. It's also important to note that here in the UK, television broadcasting had been suspended due to fears that signals would help German bombers. Television broadcasting wouldn't be resumed, incidentally, until 1946. But let's take a look.
Sorry I got up on my hind legs, boys, but you fellas trying to rope me made me nervous. Miles getting bumped off upset me, and then you birds cracking foxy, but it's all right now that I know what it's all about.
Oh, forget it, Sam.
Thursby died?
Yeah.
How'd I kill him? I forget.
He was shot in the back 4 times with a 44 or 45.
So Humphrey Bogart bookended the year in a way, with January seeing the US release of Raoul Walsh's High Sierra, with Bogart and Ida Lupino starring, and the end of the year seeing Bogey casting John Huston's debut feature, The Maltese Falcon. Imagine The Maltese Falcon being your first movie. Now, based off the Dashiell Hammett novel from 1930, here we have Bogart as Private Eye Sam Spade. He's been hired to find a missing girl, but soon becomes embroiled with a cast of sketchy characters all trying to get their hands on the Maltese Falcon, a legendary jewel-encrusted bird statue. Now, it's a twisty, turny thriller with a script that's glass sharp. The cast also features Peter Lorre, Mary Astor, and became a template of sorts for the next couple of decades worth of private eye crime movies. So Preston Sturges was a prolific screenwriter of the 1930s, and he only directed about 14 movies, but a few of those include The Lady Eve, The Palm Beach Story, and this comedy classic, Sullivan's Travels. The story of a Hollywood director who wants to see life through the eyes of a homeless person in order to gain some personal experience for his next film project. Along the way, he meets the astonishing Veronica Lake, and the pair go on a truly madcap adventure that pokes fun at Hollywood whilst highlighting the best and worst of people out in the real world. It's a screwball comedy masterwork that's brimming with sight gags and witty banter, whilst also going quite dark at times. Veronica Lake's star power made it a success, but it apparently took critics a little longer to catch on to its greatness. Now, such was the efficiency of the Hollywood movies machine that a month or two after Sullivan's Travels was released came Preston Sturges' next movie, The Lady Eve, one of cinema's greatest comedy romances ever. It features Henry Fonda's rich brewery heir getting swindled by Barbara Stanwyck and co. Aboard an ocean liner. Now, the comedy mostly comes from how much of a dope Fonda is, and when romance looms into view and Stanwyck's con artist is revealed, it becomes a tale of revenge, and quite a different movie in its second half, I think. Fonda, who for me was never a great comic actor, is outshone by red-hot Barbara Stanwyck here, approaching the height of her powers. Now, before we go any further, let's discuss a film that's been discussed maybe more than any film in this or any year. Citizen Kane, the story of the life and times of a newspaper magnate and the mystery surrounding his dying words. It's regularly cited as the greatest film ever made, featuring, for the time, trailblazing techniques in cinematography, structure and editing that would have an effect on filmmaking for decades to come. It's crammed full of visual effects and inventive camera work that are the feature of hundreds of books across probably thousands of YouTube videos, no doubt. Its central performance by an only 26-year-old Orson Welles, who also directed, produced and co-wrote the thing, is excellent, and it simultaneously kick-started and ruined his career. Never again would he reach anything near this, although Touch of Evil comes pretty close. Maybe the original, now long lost cut of The Magnificent Ambersons would have, but its existing 88-minute version is a bit of a mess. Now, Citizen Kane is less seen these days and in danger of being discarded by history. A huge shame, as it's still essential. So the summer of 1941 saw the release of one of the biggest films of the year, actually the highest grossing movie of the year, Sergeant York, starring Gary Cooper as Alvin C. York, based on a true story, that of Sergeant Alvin C. York, who was a Tennessee farmer who, because of his strong religious beliefs, unsuccessfully attempted to register as a conscious objector during the war. He's soon discovered to be a brilliant marksman, but refuses to use his skills to kill. He's eventually persuaded to do his duty by some divine intervention. Now, one of my personal favourite films from 1941 is Here Comes Mr. Jordan, the story of a boxer who, due to a clerical error in heaven, dies 50 years too soon. But it's not all doom and gloom, as he's given a new life as a millionaire playboy. The only problem is it's a millionaire playboy that nobody likes, and he has to convince everyone he's now actually a decent guy. If you've ever seen the TV show Quantum Leap, you'll recognise the plot device of having a guy in someone else's body talking to an assistant that's invisible to everybody else.
Give me a little time. You can fix it.
There's no time left at all now, Joe.
Then I say no. No. You're not going to play tricks with my life again. I'm going to stay like I am.
You cannot change the course of your destiny.
We'll see about that. You think you can pry me loose from Farnsworth? You go ahead and try it.
It was also pretty much remade in the 70s as Heaven Can Wait, and I think again in the early 2000s with Chris Rock. It's got great performances here from Robert Montgomery and Claude Rains, working from its Oscar-winning screenplay, which effortlessly mixes tragedy and comedy. Now, although much of the world would have to wait until early 1942, the United States was getting an autumn 1941 release of Walt Disney's Dumbo, a big-eared young circus elephant separated from his mother and thrown into the comedy clown act at the big top before his little mouse friend helps him in his quest for acceptance and stardom. Dumbo's success was such that it bailed Disney out financially after the expense they lavished on Pinocchio and Fantasia. It's notable, of course, for not only being a stone-cold animated classic, but at 64 minutes runtime, it's barely feature-length. It has a central character that doesn't say a word and features the famous pink elephants on parade sequences. Dumbo and Timothy Mouse drink water spiked with champagne, an almost 60s style psychedelic moment in a film 25 years away from the Summer of Love. So I want to finish up this video in a few minutes with a look at Cary Grant and Alfred Hitchcock's first collaboration, but first let's have a quick look at another handful of classics from 1941. Firstly, we have a couple of now classic horrors in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's not as great as the still quite shocking 1931 version, but stars Spencer Tracy, Ingrid Bergman and Lana Turner, so it's obviously worth a watch. And we also get The Wolfman here, which is still up there with the greatest werewolf movies ever made. This stars Lon Chaney Jr., Claude Rains again, and Bela Lugosi. And we also have Powell and Pressburger's World War II thriller, The 49th Parallel, with Sir Laurence Olivier and Leslie Howard. Essentially a well-made propaganda piece to persuade the US to join the Allies in the war. Now, speaking of wartime thrillers, I mean, this era was full of them. I personally love Tower of Terror, not the Disney theme park ride / TV movie, but the 1941 Lighthouse Sets psychological spy romance thriller that's slow to get off the mark, but has a final act that's about as bonkers as things got back then. I've also got a soft spot for both Fritz Lang's Western Union with Randolph Scott and Michael Curtiz's The Seawolf, a zippy little naval adventure with Ida Lupino and John Garfield up against Edward G. Robertson's Skipper with an Iron Fist. So Alfred Hitchcock came over to the United States in 1940. He announced himself with the masterwork that is Rebecca and the still brilliant thriller Foreign Correspondent that same year. He then followed this up with the so-so Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 1941, along with this film, Suspicion, starring Cary Grant and Joan Fontaine. For me, this begins a run of movies that's still probably unparalleled today. Here, though, in Suspicion, he takes Cary Grant and fashions a handsome, charming, smooth as silk gentleman that just happens to be a compulsive gambler, a liar, and perhaps even a murderer. His new bride, Joan Fontaine, becomes increasingly suspicious of him. Where is all this money going? Where do these expensive gifts keep coming from? And what's with that fondness for facts about murder? And when his old chum Beaky, a fabulous Nigel Bruce, turns up and then suspiciously disappears, well, Fontaine won the Oscar here, but Grant's ability to seesaw between charming and darkly threatening keeps everyone guessing right up until that famous ambiguous ending. And I think I'll end it there, and I'll let you guys fill in any blanks. Which other great movies were released in 1941? I'm sure I've missed at least a few. Let me know in the comments below. In the meantime, though, as always, thanks for watching, and happy viewing.
What is it?
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Huh?